This is a brand new series. It's called Lead Like Jesus, and as the name suggests, it's all about how to go forward and lead just like him. We hope you learned something.
Well, hey there to our Elevate family. Great to have you with us once again. As a church, we've just wrapped up 21 days of prayer and fasting. And that whole undertaking was focused on one very specific objective, and that was for us to be seeking God to help us be more effective in reaching people. And reaching people and being more effective in reaching people always starts with prayer. Then the almost natural next step is to look at how we can grow our influence, how we can grow and be more effective in influencing the people in our spheres. And who better to learn about influence than Jesus. And so today we're launching a brand new series on leadership, specifically called Lead Like Jesus. And we unashamedly have taken that title from a seminal book on the subject with that same title, Lead Like Jesus, by Ken Blanchard and Phil Hodges. Ken Blanchard in particular is a guru, a leadership and management guru over many decades. And this book, just the subtitle is Lessons for Everyone from the Greatest Leadership Role Model of All Time. The greatest leadership role model of all time, Jesus. This carpenter's son from an insignificant town in the known world at the time. Someone who didn't have a title, someone who lived in the height of the Roman Empire, and yet his legacy and his significance and his contribution has outlived all of the notable Roman emperors. I also want to just underline and draw from the subtitle of this book, where Blanchard and Hodges say it's lessons for everyone. And this is a very important thing for us to understand, and that is to develop a broader perspective on who exactly is a leader, beyond thinking that it's only those chosen few who rank high on the organizational chart. It's only business leaders, it's only managers, it's only the school principal, it's only the leader of the church, or maybe, leaders of specific teams in a church. And yet, we're going to work on this series from the basis of a broader understanding of who is a leader. And really it comes down to, and it boils down to, a definition that I came across many, many years ago and have taken to be, I think, the most accurate definition of leadership. And that is simply that leadership is influence. And this was very much Jesus' platform. Like I said, he didn't have a title of leader. Now, it is true that people with positions of leadership need to continue to develop their leadership. Don't just kind of settle at a level, or don't just think because you've got a title that makes you an effective leader. However, beyond people with positions of leadership, if leadership is influence, then all of us, dads, mums, grandparents, colleagues, classmates, friends, community, within the church, all of us that fit into those categories, and all of us who have spheres of people who fit into those categories, all of us can, and dare I say, ought to, develop our leadership. And the way we do that is to build out greater influence. And it's my conviction that followers of Jesus should be the most effective leaders on the planet. And that simply comes back to this same subtitle of the book, Lead Like Jesus, that we have a front row seat to learn leadership from the greatest leadership role model of all time. Which, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, there's been a lot of leaders over many, many centuries, many thousands of years. And, you know, I could rattle off some of their names. But to say that Jesus is the greatest leadership role model of all time, it's a bold statement. Yet, play this game with me. Let's say you and I, we could get into the Wayback Machine and we can go back 2,000 years and we can be inserted into the time in history where Jesus physically walked the earth, where he was living in the area of the world where the Jewish religion was the prominent religion, that the Roman Empire was the dominant government of its time. If we were then just living in that part of the world, and I said to you, hey, let's take a bet. Let's bet on something. Who do you think in 2,000 years' time is going to be the most influential? Who's going to have the most influential legacy? Jesus, an insignificant carpenter, son from a small out-of-the-way town called Nazareth, or one of the prominent Roman leaders of that time? I'd hazard a guess that you'd almost certainly put your money on one of the Roman leaders. And yet, today is the year 2021, and we mark that all around the world. We all agree it's 2021. It's 2021 years after what? After the birth, not of a Roman Empire, after the birth of Jesus. The two most popular globally annual events on the calendar are Christmas and Easter. People to this day, particularly in English-speaking countries, obviously, are quite likely to name their children after some of Jesus' early followers. Peter, Matthew, John, Mark, Sarah, Mary. And very rarely will you hear them naming their children Nero or Herod. So we're going to take a journey together, delving into and learning leadership from the greatest leadership role model of all time, and that's Jesus. And so it's going to be a few weeks together. Today, I want to look at the jump-off point and put it to you that leadership starts with the heart. And that cues from something that Solomon said. King Solomon, one of the wisest people that ever lived, he wrote this: keep vigilant watch over your heart. That's where life starts. And if that's where life starts, our heart, then it goes almost without saying that that's where leadership starts. Our motive, our why. And this isn't actually how a lot of leadership training, leadership seminars, leadership books, leadership webinars, this isn't actually where a lot of them start. In fact, more often than not, they zero immediately into the what and the how of leadership. And very rarely take a step back to this idea that the jump-off point is the why. And I would say if the why is the most important thing, then if your why is off, then your what and your how will also be off. Motives, the reason that we would want to grow our influence, really, really matters. Now, Ken Blanchard for several decades has been like a guru in this space, and one of the more recent gurus in this leadership space is a guy named Patrick Lencioni. Now, Patrick Lencioni, he distills the question of what your motivation for leading might be into two categories. Number one, that you might be motivated by responsibility. He called it responsibility-based leadership, or alternatively, that your motivation for wanting to grow your influence and become a leader is rewards-based leadership. And some of the characteristics of the two, because they actually are in reasonably stark contrast, are responsibility-based leadership. You recognize that it's your responsibility to serve the people you lead. Whereas rewards-based leadership is looking, and you're motivated by the perks and the power that you can get from leading. And Jesus, the greatest role model in leadership of all time, he modeled the first. He modeled responsibility-based leadership, and he eschewed and pushed back against rewards-based leadership. Let me show you. Hey, so if you've got your Bible app, how about you open it, maybe grab a second device and take it to Matthew chapter 20. Now, Matthew was one of Jesus' 4 biographers, and the slides I want to drop you into, before I drop us in there, let me give a little bit of the backstory. Now, Jesus, when he turned 30, as was customary for someone who was a rabbi, they would then pick 12 people, 12 men as it happened, to be their disciples, their closest followers. And Jesus did that, and his idea was that he was going to invest into them while he was still on this earth, that ultimately when he died and left the earth, that they would go on and build his legacy and ultimately transform the world. And he did this over a 3.5-year period by teaching them about leadership and influence and modeling leadership and influence. Safe to say that they weren't necessarily picking up what he was putting down. At least not all of them were. In fact, they thought that he was going to be a king, but they actually thought he was going to ultimately ascend to become the earthly king of the Jews. And in fact, when we drop into this slice of history, they were making their way to Jerusalem. And so his followers were getting increasingly excited because they thought, wow, we're so close to Jesus becoming the king of the Jews. And when he becomes a king, we get to reap a whole bunch of benefits as well. So that gave them extra motivation. Now, he just, in this moment in history, Jesus had just finished again telling these followers that he was going to die, that he was going to make the ultimate act of service by giving up his life for those he led. And then Matthew continues. It was about that time that the mother of the Zebedee brothers, James and John, by the way, came with her 2 sons and knelt before Jesus with a request. Well, what do you want? Jesus asked. Well, she said, give your word that these 2 sons of mine will be awarded the highest place of honor in your kingdom, one at your right hand, one at your left hand. Jesus responded, you have no idea what you're asking. And he said to James and John, are you capable of drinking the cup that I'm about to drink? And they said, sure. Why not? Like when you become the king of the Jews, if one of us is sitting at your right hand and one of us is sitting at your left hand, then you take a drink of something and then you just pass it to us. And you've proven that it wasn't poison. You've probably acknowledged that it was delicious. And yeah, we can absolutely drink from the same cup. And what they didn't realize is Jesus was asking them, are you willing to make the sort of sacrifice to carry out the sorts of service that I'm about to demonstrate to the people I lead by ultimately giving your lives? Well, when the 10 others heard about this, that James and John had asked, effectively for the second and third in charge positions of Jesus' new kingdom, well, they lost their tempers, thoroughly disgusted with the 2 brothers. See, because they're all jockeying for position. Who's going to have the most prominent places in the cabinet? Who's going to be the prime minister, the deputy prime minister, etc. Hey, and by the way, what made it worse? You brought your mum. Well, Jesus with all of this hubbub, calls a timeout. And he highlighted a couple of things for them. He said, you've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, how quickly a little power goes to their heads. See, they were living in a time which leadership and governance was performed by the Roman Empire and by the Jewish religious leaders, most of whom, in fact, the dominant leadership approach in that time was this idea of rewards-based leadership, that the motivation for leading was about gaining more perks, gaining more power for yourself, often at the expense of those that you lead. And because of that, it's likely the 12 were thinking, yeah, sure, we'd like some of that too. Jesus said to them, it's not going to be that way with you. And Jesus does what he always does. He reframes to a better way. And he taught them, whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That's what the Son of Man has done. Jesus himself came to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for the many who are held hostage. He's telling them, if you want to lead like Jesus, you have to serve like Jesus, and you'll never be able to lead like Jesus unless you serve like Jesus. And I think inherently you and I know this. I mean, just take a moment to think about the people who have had the most impact on your life because of how they led you well. I'm pretty confident it's not going to be someone that threw their weight around. I'm pretty confident it's not going to be somebody who rose up by pushing you down. In fact, I'd almost be willing to bet, I'm not a betting man, but that it was someone who served you. It was a parent that served you. It was a teacher that served you. It was a coach that served you. It was a boss or a colleague that served you. Somebody that saw and took the approach with their leadership and their influence as being responsibility-based, that their motivation was to serve you. And so the question I'm asking today is, do you want to be that sort of leader? Now, on this journey, whether you're just about to embark on the journey of intentionally growing your influence, or whether you're already on the journey, there's going to be some diagnostics that it's important to run to just check and double check and recheck that our motivation, our why, is responsibility-based, not rewards-based. So let me run some diagnostics now. Responsibility-based leadership is that you're motivated to make other people look good. However, if your motivation is rewards-based, then you're motivated to first and foremost make yourself look good. See, as a responsibility-based leader, you're hopefully going to make other people feel great and act great rather than try to convince and coerce them to think that you're great. Responsibility-based leaders find their approval in and from God. Rewards-based leaders find their approval and seek the approval of people. And if you're confident that your approval comes from God, then you don't see people as a threat. You don't see people rising up and growing as a threat to who you are. In fact, you see it as ultimately the success of you and your influence in their life as a part of your legacy. And so you'll give them everything you've got. You won't withhold. You won't try to keep them down and play the sort of games that too many people and too many organizations make. You'll make your goal lifting them up. Here's another diagnostic. Responsibility-based leaders, they actually relish hard feedback from trusted people, whereas rewards-based leaders, they actually shun hard feedback. because they feel like it's a threat. They feel like someone's telling them they're not doing a good enough job. Now, I did say trusted people. Not everyone has an equal voice in your life. Not everyone should have an equal voice in your life. There should be a platform of trust so that when they bring feedback, even if it's hard feedback, that there's an understanding that this person is bringing you the feedback because they want to make you more effective and not put you down. One of the most powerful times I've seen this done was in a leadership roundtable that was actually being led by an older leader who was now investing into up-and-coming leaders as part of them building their legacy and taking responsibility to serve the next generation of leaders. And this roundtable was going on for some time. And at one point in time, the older leader said to one of the younger up-and-coming leaders at the round table, hey, do you mind if I give you some feedback on an area that I think you can improve in? And the oxygen just about left the room. It's like, because they wanted to give this feedback in the open, like in front of all of the other young and up-and-coming leaders. And this young leader of whom the question was asked, do you mind if I give you some feedback? He leant forward and he said, yeah, give me a gift. Because this young up-and-coming leader, he knew that if he can learn from this trusted leader and was open to that he had a responsibility to do that so that he could be more effective in leading and serving those that he led. I want to introduce you to a phenomenal lady. Her name's Mary Peters. Now, this series, Lead Like Jesus, we've been inspired by a church called Christ Church in the Valley in the greater Phoenix area in the USA, who themselves taught a similar series. And through their series, they took this moment, Ashley, the leader of that church, took this moment to interview Mary Peters. And I want you to be inspired and learn from that interview right now.
Mary, thank you for coming in. We've known each other for a little while now, but our church does not know who Mary Peters is. So just maybe give us an introduction.
Sure. Well, Mary Peters was born and raised right here in the greater Phoenix area. And I've just been blessed with many opportunities as I've gone through my life and my career.
So you served as the Secretary of Transportation for the United States government.
Yes.
over all transportation in the whole United States.
Yes.
It's one of the few positions that reports directly to the president. You've led at one of the highest levels. What have you learned about leadership?
Well, I think when you go to DC and you go into a position like that, by and large, the staff that you work with are what they call career employees, or they've been there. And there was a thing, if you don't work with them, you're not going to get anything done. And servant leadership is what really opened the door, I think, with the career employees to be able to get us to work together to accomplish objectives and make sure things happen. And you have to be a servant leader to do that. If you come in with command and control, you're not getting anything done. In fact, the staff will call you the weebies, meaning we be here when you be gone. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people assume that when you get into high levels of leadership that you need to be this like commanding, domineering, everybody works for you, so you're this demanding leader. But you'd say you've seen the opposite. It's more effective to lead by serving others.
It is.
Man, tell me more about that.
I would always say that that I was privileged to lead. That was a great privilege to lead people. But one of the things, and you've talked about this recently too, is defining true north. Where do we want to go? What do we want to accomplish together? So that you can get everybody on the same path, if you will, to get us where we're going. If you, as a leader, don't provide that true north and communicate that through the organization, very well-meaning people will just maybe their hair off, they're just a measure off, but you're going to end up in very different places at the end of the day. Now, you could do that with a command and control leadership, but if you do, it's only going to be while they're watching you. And it's not going to be forever.
Mary, talk to me a little bit, because you've been around so many good leaders. You've probably been around some people in really high leadership levels that were not good leaders. How does this idea of ego, or you need to serve me, how have you seen that backfire on people?
And I have seen that. Sometimes someone gets in a position, even like a governor or a senator or something like that, and they feel entitled. They say to themselves, I worked hard to get here. I've done all this. I deserve this position, and I'm not going to let anybody get in my way of doing things. And those are never successful. They really are never successful. And often these leaders fall with them. They may take others in the organization with them, but they fall from grace, even in the political world that they have created. And command and control leadership just doesn't get the richness that you want from the workforce and from everyone there. So I've seen some big people fall who took that kind of position.
Yeah. How have you seen, over, a lot of years of leading, how have you seen your heart sometimes gravitate away from that, being that servant leader? Because it seems like sometimes that your heart doesn't gravitate towards it. You have to keep reminding yourself that this is who I am.
Yes.
I'm a servant, right? I'm a servant.
Yes.
Like, have you seen your heart? You having to realign your heart throughout the years at all?
I think one of the things that I've noticed with myself and others as well is, I'm going to be a servant leader here at this, at this family or something like that. But when I go to church, but when I go to work, that's another story. That's not who I am. And you have to, what are your Christian values? What do you as a Christian want to emulate and really teach other people to be? So you can't let yourself go away.
It's so good what you said, that I think sometimes we compartmentalize servant leadership. Like, I'll serve on the weekends at church 1 hour, but then when I go to work, no, I'm not a servant here. But Jesus says serving isn't something you do, it's who you are.
Yes, it's so important. And, families depend on that. And I tell people, all of you are a leader in some aspect or another. And if we truly want to adhere to our Christian values and follow Jesus' lead, then we need to do that no matter where we are.
Well, Mary, there's not a lot of people that would know this, but tell me about where you serve around here at CCV.
I serve in the 2-year-old classroom.
Wait a second. You led at the highest levels of leadership, and yet you're gonna serve with 2-year-olds. Maybe one of the hardest areas to serve in the entire church. Tell me about that. Tell me how that came about.
I think a lot of things that people say that if you do this, you're going to make a sacrifice, you're going to do this or that. No, this is such a Christian opportunity to really get to know and see these kids and love them and make the parents comfortable when they come and drop that kid off and that little one may be crying and screaming and doesn't want to get in there, and you got to stay with him. But it makes your heart good. It just makes your heart feel good that you're doing what you need to be doing to help everyone at this church.
Yeah. I just want to look you in the eyes, and I just want to say, you inspire me. You like make me want to be a better leader, because I see your leadership, and you're a leader of leaders, and yet you're one of the most servant-hearted people I've ever met in my life, and I'm just glad you're a part of our church.
I am too.
So I just hope your story inspires all of us to get off the sidelines and become a servant in every area of our lives.
Don't play church. Be a Christian.
Wow. Well, thank you for taking some time with us.
My privilege. Thank you.
So you would have just heard Mary talk about not compartmentalizing her leadership approach. We might think that leading with a servant heart, motivated by service, responsibility-based leadership, that's just something that you do in the church. And it's easier to do in the church because that's what you're meant to do in the church. But out there in the real world, it's dog eat dog. It's every man for themselves. It's put people down and step over them and climb up. And she's saying, no, you take this responsibility-based leadership, this servant-hearted leadership into every sphere that God has placed you in. Phenomenal. Hey, I've loved teeing off this brand new series, Lead Like Jesus. And next week I'm going to continue. And I'd love you to be back. And I'd love you to bring someone with you. Have them park on the couch next to you or wherever it is that you're joining us from. And let's together become more effective leaders in the spheres that God's placed us in.